Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Friday, January 7th, 2022. And our top story today, ESG questions that companies need to answer. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Bob Colley is the founder and principal of Colley ESG. Bob, Happy New Year to you, and thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Happy New Year to you as well, Jeffrey. It should be a good one.
Yeah, let's hope that 2022 is better than 2021. And by all accounts, ESG assets are swelling, so I think that's probably really good for your business. Let's talk about some things that companies need to think about around ESG. And you sit in a lot of these boardroom meetings advising people around their pensions and pool of assets. What are some of the things that they need to be thinking about as in the context of ESG?
That's a great question, because what's happened, of course, is that there's more interest now from retail consumers, there's more interest from institutional investors, and so there's demand for more information. People want to follow more ESG-friendly strategies, whether that's environmental, whether it's social, whatever the areas you want to emphasize are. So because there's demand for that, you need the right information in order to then follow those strategies. You need the right tools. You need basically better infrastructure to support that sort of decision making than we've had in the past. And so that then creates additional pressure on asset managers. They have to start to build out their teams that are capable of doing this analysis. And then further down the line, that puts pressure on companies, because there's more demand for more information from companies. And it's not just that the investors are asking for this information more, there's also more and more regulation that's requiring companies to produce more information, to give more disclosure on the environmental impact of their activities, and in a lot of cases, the social implications of what they're doing as well. So really, we're just seeing a lot of moving parts throughout the whole system, from the companies, from the investment firms, as well as from the end investors.
And Bob, if you're a company and you're not focused on the ESG, I think you risk, or an organization, it doesn't necessarily have to be a company, but I think you risk falling behind in a lot of different ways, falling behind relative to your competitors, falling behind in terms of governance and things that public asset managers are looking for. So this is something that really probably needs to be addressed now, sooner rather than later.
It does, and of course, for any given company, they're trying to juggle two related but different demands on them. And one of those demands is that people just want particular types of information. They'll say, we want to know what your greenhouse gas emissions are, so the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, all sorts of information that people want that related to specific types of disclosures. But then there's also a more subtle and targeted type of information that would say that that's actually relevant to your particular business. So a good example here would be, say, water management. For certain types of business, if this is a really big deal, and if you're investing in a forestry company, for example, you really want to know how good are they at managing the water resources around, because in a lot of the world, water availability is a big issue, and it's becoming a bigger issue. So if you're an ESG investor and you're looking at some types of company, that's a big deal. But if you're looking at other types of company, it's irrelevant. For an awful lot of potential investment opportunities that you're looking at, whether they're good at managing water or not, it's rounding error in terms of the business as a whole. And so unlike a lot of aspects of investment where you can basically apply the same process to any type of company that you're investing in, a lot of the ESG issues are very specific to what is the particular business that the company's in. As I say, if you're comparing a forestry company with a tech company, you're going to be asking very different questions. if a tech company is messing up on data privacy, if it's not managing your data or my data properly, that's a really, really big deal for a tech company. Other types of company, maybe not so important. And so companies do need to be thinking not just of the general ESG demands, but also what are the specific demands for the type of business that they're in.
Bob, how important are metrics, right? And you and I, we've talked about greenwashing. We've talked about how do you define ESG, which, by the way, we're going to talk in the second segment because there's some clarification, I think, needed in the EU. But these metrics, you can have goals, you can have objectives, you can do all these things that we're talking about, but you got to be able to benchmark yourself and also benchmark, against the progress you're making. So you're benchmarking against yourself, but you're also benchmarking against your peers. So how important are those metrics?
Yeah. I mean, they're part of the picture. And as with anything in business, if you have no numbers, if it's all just being done around the feel, then you're not going to make the best decisions. So you have to be looking at the numbers where they're available. And as I say, this is one of the trends that is a big deal within the industry, is more disclosure being asked from companies that allow people to start to build those metrics. But it has to be said that even with the disclosures that are coming on stream now, the extent to which the metrics answer the questions that you really want answered is at best going to be limited. You can certainly manage down any metric without necessarily achieving any good. You can just manipulate the portfolio in particular ways, going to certain types of investment that look good on the surface, but you're just gaming the metric. And equally, you can actually be doing some really good things within the portfolio that don't necessarily result in the metrics being better. So it's not a perfect correspondence. You can't only manage the metric in order to achieve good. That said, it's not like the metrics are meaningless. There's real information in the data that's disclosed, and it is something that the best companies are looking at quite carefully and trying to interpret as best they can. So it's a mixed picture on metrics, but I think that's going to get better over time as people get used to dealing with them.
And Bob, we often talk about audited financials. I would imagine that audited and independent data sources, that's going to kind of lead the way. And you grew up in the asset management business in terms of being a notable head of research. I grew up in the asset management business as a consultant. And, creating your own benchmark allows you to kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but finagle or that's not a kind word, but you know what I mean? It's just, but having uniformity, using independent audited data probably is the path forward for a lot of the stuff we're talking about here.
It is one of the ways, so that there will always be these questions around, well, how meaningful are these numbers? And I mentioned earlier the greenhouse gas emissions, and if we were to collapse the whole question of sustainability and the whole of ESG down to just one number, which is how much carbon is in the atmosphere, so you've got this one number that becomes quite measurable at one level. Even if we were to say that's the only number that we care about is what are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with a particular company, it's still quite difficult to measure that perfectly, but you can do a reasonable job, and people are doing a better job over time. As soon as you broaden that to a wider set of goals, and you might be saying, well, we don't only care about climate change, we're also concerned about biodiversity. That's a really big deal. The impact that we're having, desertification, the fact that we're losing land erosion, ocean acidification, all these environmental issues, which are kind of related to climate change, but they're different to it. Once you start to add those metrics, well, now you've just got this long list of numbers that you're juggling, and put the social issues on top of that, diversity, human rights. How do you come up with a single measure that would say, well, this is how ESG friendly or this is how sustainable a particular company is? It becomes, very much a subjective judgment. And so with metrics, they're very important, and different people are going to come up with their own measures, but there's never going to be a single perfect answer to how sustainable a particular business is, because there's just too many moving parts and too many different ways to measure it.
Yeah, and I guess referencing the Arthurian legend, you're in the UK, it's kind of the holy grail, if you will, to have that level of perfection. And it may not exist. Bob, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about investors wanting more clarity about what ESG really is. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you over 50? Would you like to get up to 33% more income in retirement? Then call now for this free book, Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers. This free book reveals little-known secrets about annuity strategies that will help you make the right choices before buying an annuity. Call right now for your free book, and as a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report, both absolutely free, for calling Annuity General today.
Call 800-504-8194.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to Bob Colley, principal and founder of Colley ESG. Bob, thanks as always for staying with us this morning.
Not a problem.
And look, clarity, you were just talking about it, transparency, clarity, very important. And even though the UK is no longer part of the European Union because of Brexit, and that's a whole other issue we're not going to cover here, but this is an issue seeking clarity about how ESG is defined is a big deal for investors in the European Union. And I would imagine also for those in the UK and across the globe.
Yes, it is. And you have to understand here that the motivation that the EU has is, very much it's a justified motivation here, because what you don't want is for investment firms to just be able to say, "Yeah, our product is green," and then when you scratch below the surface, they've done nothing of substance there. It's too easy to make these claims without actually making any difference. And so what they've said is, in order to avoid greenwashing, we want to have objective standards that we say, if you're going to call yourself a green fund, you have to meet these particular criteria. So, it's very understandable that that's something they would want to do to protect consumers, to make sure that people are buying what they think they're buying. But you do run into problems when you get into the details of what should those criteria be, because either you're going to find that certain products, which when you look at them very closely, are very much sustainability focused and doing really good things for the environment, but they happen not to meet the exact criteria that you came up with. So you're going to have those types of problems, that maybe funds that you'd like to be within that umbrella don't quite meet the criteria. Or you've got funds which manage to kind of manipulate what they're doing so that they happen to pass all these tests that you've got, but they're doing it in a way which isn't actually achieving the objective. And so you've got that mismatch between the intent and the reality of what's going on. And so actually defining the rules that say this is what we're going to call a green fund is proving to be much more difficult than was anticipated. And that's where these issues are coming from.
Bob, how likely is it that the industry is able to regulate itself, referee itself, whatever the right terminology is, to come up with these standards? Does it take an outside entity like a regulatory board, which, by the way, probably has influence from asset managers on it because that's the way government works? But how likely is it that we're going to see standards? Because if you come up with standards and it disadvantages one of the asset managers, I'd vote against that.
Exactly. And so the best outcome here is not something that's just dictated by the regulator, and it's not something which is entirely driven by the industry. It's the best outcomes in these situations tend to be where they manage to kind of work out. The regulator's role is to keep the industry honest, in the sense of to understand here's the pressure points. We have to make sure that the objectives are there. We have to make sure that you're not doing anything that's just outright fraudulent and you're not misrepresenting what you're doing. And so the regulator has this unique power to set to define the rules of the game. And then what the asset management industry has, and what the private sector in general has, is this fantastic ability to find solutions within that framework. And so what you don't want is the government taking over and trying to do things that are better done by the private sector. But equally, you don't want the private sector having this free rein to do whatever it wants, because then what happens is the money motivation becomes too big and consumers start to lose out. And so the skillful regulators are the ones who are able to understand, this is where the self-regulation is failing. This is where we need to just draw a line in the sand and say, when you say X, you have to do X. And defining that. One analogy that I'll use here sometimes is, we have a dangerous driving law, right? Every state has a law that says you're not allowed to, dangerous driving is an offense, but you still have a speed limit. And you could say, well, but if somebody's driving faster than they should, that's dangerous driving. Why do we need another law? In practice, unless you've got something that's quite specific, you can't enforce the dangerous driving law around the regulations. And so, is every speed limit set at the right number for what it should be on the road? It is absolutely not. But you've got that very objective, very easy to measure rule, which is an imperfect measure of dangerous driving, alongside this much more kind of principle-based rule of dangerous driving. And regulation is like that as well, that you can say we want, if somebody's selling a green product, we want it to genuinely be sustainable and green and all these good things in a very vague kind of principle sense. But you also need to supplement that with very specific rules, like the specific speed limits that would say, and here's the way that we're going to make sure that, that we don't have abuses in practice. And so the art of regulation is definitely one which requires a kind of a sense of where the pressures are and where regulatory action is needed.
Yeah, and Bob, there are billions, maybe even trillions of dollars at stake in terms of sustainable investing. Does it start in, I referenced, I think in our first segment, how, you grew up in the asset management and the consulting world. A fund may be named X, but deviate slightly from what the name of the fund is. Mid-cap in a mid-cap growth fund, they may look at small cap, right? There's all sorts of blending that goes on. Does it start with naming conventions? Because look, the average person, myself included, I look at the fund. I'm not going to read a whole prospectus, Bob.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone, it just seems like a waste of paper, by the way, but does it start there with naming conventions?
That has to be part of it, doesn't it? And this is, there's this conversation started with the EU quite reasonably reach that conclusion of let's have sensible naming conventions. Let's, if someone says it's a climate friendly fund, then you have to be doing something in that fund that's climate friendly. And so as a starting point, that's a great place to go. How you apply that and where exactly you draw the line of saying, in order to call yourself green, what do you have to be? The downside of it is you're going to end up with a definition of green which is imperfect. You can come up with the best possible definition that's achievable, and it still won't capture everything that you might have around what a fund might be. But unless you have something that is very objective and clear that says if you want to label yourself as a green fund, then you have to meet these certain criteria. Unless you have some objective criteria that do that, then the label becomes meaningless, because you could call anything green, and all it takes is a reasonable level of intelligence and a good feel for marketing, and you could call anything on earth green if you tried hard enough. And so finding the right objective criteria, which are a reasonable approximation for what you want to have within these funds, is worth trying to do. But wherever we end up, it will have imperfections around the edges at best.
Yeah, well, it sounds like being an auditor of these assertions would be a really great business. Sign me up for that, Bob. Bob Colley, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much. And look, we look forward to having you on throughout the year to bring us up to date on what's happening with ESG, sustainability, and climate change. Have a great rest of the week. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks very much, Jeff. You too.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives or check out our latest content? Then visit our streaming partners, Amazon, Roku, Samsung, and over 100 more. We're back again tomorrow for BRN Weekly. We'll have a very special guest, and then we'll take a look at some of our best segments for the week. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.
Are you being audited, and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.